boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora back to read to you from our novel, Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures by K.T. Camillo. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we begin with Chapter 38. Unremitting Darkness. You, said Dr. Measham to Flora, will have a seat on the sofa and listen to Mozart, and I will go make us some sandwiches. What about my father? Said Flora. Shouldn't I tell him where I am? Mr. George Buckham knows where you are, said Dr. Measham. He knows that you are safe. So good. All is good. You will sit on the horsehair sofa, please. Dr. Measham went into the kitchen, and Flora turned and looked at the couch. It was a huge couch. She dutifully sat down on it, and then slowly, very slowly, slid off it. Wow, she said. She climbed back up on the couch and concentrated on staying put. She sat with her hands on either side of her and her legs straight out in front of her. She felt like an oversized doll. She also felt very, very tired and a tiny bit confused. Maybe I'm in shock, she thought. Terrible things can happen to you, had once done an issue listing the symptoms of shock, but Flora couldn't remember what they were. Was one of the symptoms of shock that you couldn't remember the symptoms of shock? She looked over at Ulysses. He was still sitting on the dining room table. He looked confused too. She waved at him, and he nodded back. And then she noticed that there was a picture hanging on the wall opposite of the couch. It was a painting of what looked like nothing but darkness. Unremitting darkness. Unremitting darkness was a phrase that often occurred in The Criminal Element. But why would someone paint a picture of unremitting darkness? Flora slid off the couch and walked over to the painting and stared at it more closely. In the middle of all the darkness, there was a tiny boat. It was floating on a black sea. Flora put her face right up against the painting. Something was wrapped around the boat, some tentacled shadow. For the love of Pete, the tiny boat on the dark sea was getting eaten by a giant squid. Flora's heart protested with a small thud of fear. Holy bagumba, she whispered. From the kitchen, there came the sound of clinking silverware and crashing plates. The opera music ended. Ulysses, said Flora. She looked behind her and saw the squirrel sitting on the floor, sniffing his tail. Come here, she said to him. He walked over to her, and she picked him up and put him on her shoulder. Look, she said. He stared at the painting. The boat is getting eaten by a gigantic squid. He nodded. This is a tragedy, said Flora. There are people on board that boat. Look, you can see them. They're ant-sized, but they're people. Ulysses squinted. He nodded again. They're all going to die, exclaimed Flora. Every last one of them. As a superhero, you should be outraged. You should want to save them all. Incandesto would. Ah, said Dr. Measham, coming up behind them. You are studying my poor, lonely giant squid. Lonely, said Flora. The giant squid is the loneliest of all God's creatures. He can sometimes go for the whole of his life without seeing another of his kind. For some reason, Dr. Measham's word conjured up the face of William Spiver, white-haired and dark-eyed. Flora's heart scrunched up. Go away, William Spiver, she thought. That squid is a villain, said Flora out loud. He needs to be vanquished. He's eating a boat, and he's going to eat all the people on it. Yes, well, loneliness makes us do terrible things, said Dr. Measham, and that is why the picture is there, to remind me of this, and also because the other Dr. Measham painted it when he was young and joyful. Good grief, thought Flora. What did he paint when he was old and depressed? Now you will sit on the horsehair sofa, please, said Dr. Measham, and I will bring out the jelly sandwiches. Flora sat down on the couch. Ulysses was still on her shoulder. She put up her hand and touched him. He was warm. He was a small engine of warmness. The giant squid is the loneliest creature in all existence, said Flora out loud. And then to keep things grounded and in perspective, she muttered, seal blubber. And then she whispered, do not hope, instead observe. She kept her hand on the squirrel. Chapter 39. The Tears Roll Off. Dr. Measham came out of the kitchen holding a pink plate with small sandwiches on it. She sat down next to Flora. You are enjoying the horsehair sofa, she said to Flora. I guess, said Flora. She wasn't sure exactly how someone enjoyed a horsehair sofa. You will eat a jelly sandwich, said Dr. Measham. She extended the plate to Flora. Ulysses leaped off Flora's shoulder and into her lap. He sniffed the plate. Our patient is hungry, said Dr. Measham. He never had breakfast, said Flora. She took 2 sandwiches and handed one to Ulysses. This sofa, said Dr. Measham, is the sofa of my grandmother. She was born on this sofa in Blundermeason. She lived the whole of her life there, and she is buried there in a dark wood. But that is a different story. What I meant to say is that when I was a girl in Blundermeason, I sat on this sofa and spoke with my grandmother about inconsequential things well into the gloom of the evening. That is what a girl in Blundermeason did in those days. She was expected to speak of inconsequential things. As the gloom of the evening descended, also she must knit. Always the gloom was descending in Blundermeason. Always, always one was knitting outfits for the little trolls. What little trolls? Said Flora. And where is Blundermeason? Never mind about the trolls for now. I meant only to say that life was very gloomy then, and one was always knitting. Sounds lousy, said Flora. It was exactly this. Lousy, said Dr. Measham. She smiled. Her dentures were very bright. There was a smear of grape jelly on one of the fake incisors. Flora reached for another sandwich. Had terrible things can happen to you? Ever warned about eating jelly sandwiches in a house of a woman from Blundermeason? Your father is a lonely man, said Dr. Measham. Also very sad. To leave you. This broke his heart. It did? Said Flora. Yes, yes. Mr. George Buckman has sat on this horsehair sofa many times. He has talked of his sadness. He has wept. This sofa has seen the tears of many people. It is a sofa that is good for tears. They roll off it, you see. Her father had sat on this couch and wept as the gloom of the evening descended. Flora suddenly felt like she might cry too. What was wrong with her? Seal blubber, she thought. The words steadied her. She handed another sandwich to Ulysses. Your father is very capacious of heart, said Dr. Measham. Do you know what this means? Flora shook her head. It means the heart of George Buckman is large. It is capable of containing much joy and much sorrow. Oh, said Flora. For some reason, she heard William Spiver's voice saying that the universe was a random place. Capacious heart, said Dr. Measham's voice. Random universe, said William Spiver's. Capacious, random, heart, universe. Flora felt dizzy. I'm a cynic, she announced, for no particular reason and in a too loud voice. Ah, cynics, said Dr. Measham. Cynics are people who are afraid to believe. She waved her hand in front of her face as if she were brushing away a fly. Do you believe in, things? Said Flora. Yes, yes, I believe, said Dr. Measham. She smiled her too bright smile again. Have you heard of Pascal's wagger? No, said Flora. Pascal, said Dr. Measham, had it that since it could not be proven whether God existed, one might as well believe. He did, because there was everything to gain by believing and nothing to lose. This is how it is for me. What do I lose if I choose to believe? Nothing. Take this squirrel, for instance, Ulysses. Do I believe he can type poetry? Sure, I do believe it. There is much more beauty in the world if I believe such a thing is possible. Flora and Dr. Measham looked at Ulysses. He was holding half a sandwich in his front paws. There were blobs of grape jelly in his whiskers. Do you know what a superhero is? Said Flora. Sure, I know what a superhero is. Ulysses is a superhero, said Flora, but he hasn't really done anything heroic yet. Mostly he's just flown around. He lifted a vacuum cleaner over his head. He wrote some poetry. He hasn't saved anyone, though, and that's what superheroes are supposed to do, save people. Who knows what he will do, said Dr. Measham. Who knows whom he will save? So many miracles have not yet happened. Flora watched as one of the jelly blobs on Ulysses' whiskers trembled and fell in slow motion to the horsehair sofa. All things are possible, said Dr. Measham. When I was a girl in Blundermeason, the miraculous happened every day, or every other day, or every third day. Actually, sometimes it did not happen at all, even on the third day, but still we expected it. You see what I'm saying? Even when it didn't happen, we were expecting it. We knew the miraculous would come. There was a knock at the door. See, said Dr. Measham, that will be your father, Mr. George Buckman. Flora went to the door and opened it. It was her father, and he was smiling again, still, which did seem kind of miraculous. Hi, Pop, she said. You see, said Dr. Measham, he smiles. Flora's father's smile got bigger. He took off his hat. He bowed. George Buckman, he said. How do you do? Flora couldn't help it. She smiled too. She was still smiling when a noise that sounded like the end of the world echoed through the hallway of the Blixen Arms. 1 minute her father was standing there with his hat in his hand, smiling, and the next minute Mr. Claus, the cat one, came out of nowhere and landed right on top of George Buckman's unprotected head. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for today. Stay tuned to see what happens next in our novel. Have a great day.